A very good afternoon to all respected clients, Kotak Mahindra House, Alpha team, and everyone. And I hope and wish that everyone to your side is sound and safe. I, on behalf of Alpha Capital, welcome you all on this session with Mr. Nilesh Shah on the subject COVID-19 second wave, its impact and outlook. Just to give you a brief background about second wave, just as we started celebrating the onset of vaccination in India in February, and we became complacent about the situation that due to vaccination, now the situation will improvise. The COVID cases started happening. This was the emergence of second wave, and things become completely different since then. The first difference was the post-budget rally, which took market to 51,000 level. It completely get cooled off. The market from there corrected by nearly 10%. And this has led to a lot of worries and anxiety in the heart of investor. Which were earlier prevailing in the market was commodity prices moving up, the interest rate in US and India moving up. So to tackle all these kind of questions today, we have Mr. Nilesh Shah, Managing Director of Kotak Asset Management Company with us. Just to give you a brief introduction about Nilesh, Nilesh has served most of the years with the mutual fund industry only. He was a chief officer with Franklin, Axis, ICICI. And over and above that, he is a chairman of AMFI, which is a regulatory board of a mutual fund industry. He's a very informed economist and a good speaker who explained things of this financial world in a very simplified manner. The beauty which I like most about Nilesh. So thank you, Nilesh, for joining this session.
Thanks, Akhil.
Yeah. Then I also have a co-host with me, Mr. Nikhil Vikamsi, who is a partner of Alpha Capital, who look after the South Indian market for Alpha Capital. Hi, Nikhil.
Hi, thanks, Akhil.
So we start the session, and we have divided this session in three parts. In first 5 to 10 minutes, Nilesh will provide the outlook on this second wave. The another 40 minutes is the question and answer round, where me and Nikhil will quote some questions to Nikhil. The questions which we have collected from our clients, and a lot of questions are from our research desk. And the third part is 5 to 10 minutes open session question and answer round. So Nilesh, we request you to provide an outlook on the second wave. Over to you.
Thank you, Akhil and Nikhil. Clearly, we are going through one of the most challenging times. We have now the highest number of cases on a daily basis in the world at more than 3 lakh. Even China, where this virus originated, didn't see this heights. Clearly, all of us are today fighting for hospital beds, oxygen cylinders, remdesivir injections, and so on and so forth. And in this kind of environment where our near and dear ones are getting affected, obviously it's bound to impact us. So let me divide this in 2 parts. One, a slightly longer term view. Why take a longer term view? Because that's easier to take, and it should act as a lighthouse for us. Now, as we speak, there are 2 distinct examples of vaccination success and failure. UK and Israel went into vaccination aggressively. Israel has recently announced non-wearing of masks in public place, as 99% of their population is vaccinated. And number of cases have come down dramatically. UK not as good as Israel, but is moving in that direction, courtesy lockdowns and vaccination. On the other hand, Chile, which used Chinese vaccine, and they vaccinated about 35% of their population. And as you know, Chile is a long straight line, not densely populated except in Santiago. Their number of cases are hitting all-time high. So despite using Chinese vaccine, they have not been successful. Whereas Israel, UK, to some extent US, by using various vaccines, including Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, are able to control this disease. Now,
Okay.
I am believing that Covaxin and Covishield and Sputnik in some point of time, and then eventually Johnson & Johnson and Zydus Cadilla's vaccine, this 4 or 5 vaccines put together, and on top of it, maybe even Pfizer will come to India. India will be able to control this pandemic and go back to reasonably normal life. It doesn't mean that there will be no COVID-19, but it won't be in pandemic form. It will be more local form. People will get impacted, but they won't be required to hospitalize. Now, this is the core hypothesis on current vaccination. Now, as we speak, Serum Institute makes about 6 to 7 crore vaccines a month. Bharat Bio is making roughly about 50 to 60 lakh vaccines a month. Now, all of them are in the process of ramping up. Serum will go from 6-7 crore a month to 10 crore a month. Bharat Bio will go from roughly about 60 lakhs a month to roughly about 70 crore a year. And I'm just rounding off number at 6 crore a month. So it's like 10-fold expansion. Dr. Reddy's, who have got approval for Sputnik, can ramp up their production to about 10 crore doses a year. Zydus Cadila also has capability to manufacture vaccine. Biological Evans has tied up with Johnson & Johnson, and they can also ramp up production. Some of the capacity in Haffkine Institute and integrated vaccine factory in Chennai, that also can ramp up production. So effectively, we are looking at a COVID-19 curve which is going up like this in the country. And at some point of time, it will start coming down because of vaccination. Now, this curve can flatten faster if people adopt COVID-19 appropriate behavior or lockdown happens. Now, if lockdown happens, economic activity goes for a toss and markets will suffer. If people adopt COVID-19 appropriate behavior because of fear, because of experience, or whatever the case may be, then without lockdown, we can start flattening the curve, and eventually vaccination will take care. So whichever way I look at it, over a longer period of time, I believe vaccination will control this COVID-19 cases. And maybe somewhere around September, October, November, December, like last year, we will have COVID-19 reasonably under control.
Okay.
Now, the second thing which is coming into play is obviously the medicine. Today, there is one drug under phase 3 trial called Molnupiravir. Again, these are all Google searches. I'm not a medical student, so please ignore whatever I'm saying. But at least Molnupiravir seems to be giving a reasonably good control over COVID-19 virus load, even though it's just an oral vaccine. It's just an oral medicine, not even vaccine. It's a proper medicine. There is one more nasal spray which is under development that also is showing positive signs. And if we do Google searches of medical journals and medical forums, there is reasonably strong belief that in over next 6 to 9 months, we should have oral dosages of medicine, either nasal spray or tablets, which will control COVID-19. Now put vaccination and medicine together. Over next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, will we see COVID-19 getting into the background? Answer is yes. Now, it can happen faster, it can happen a little later, depending upon lockdown and depending upon people's behavior. Our hypothesis right now is that there will be limited lockdowns. It will be more regional lockdown, rotational lockdown, rather than nation-level lockdown. Even today, there are about 100 odd districts where COVID is completely out of control, but 600 other districts seems to be doing well. And hence, there is probably no need for nationwide lockdown. Now convert all these things into the economic parlance, which market will be more interested. Now, if we look at the data which is published till 31st of March, there is virtually no impact of COVID-19 on economic activities. Your GST bill collection, 1,24,000 crore, e-way bill generation, all-time high, railway freight loading, all-time high, your power generation, diesel consumption, import exports, every number which you could think of has been consistently rising and having no material impact of COVID-19. Now, one can logically argue that COVID-19 started picking up much more in April than in March, which is a fair point. Now, the data which is available sketchily, see, 31st March data is available in plenty, but month-to-date data up till 21st April or so, it's available little bit sketchy. Now here, Nomura Business Resumption Index is down from 99 to about 90. So that's a 10% reduction. If you look at some of the data on power consumption, it has not yet been impacted. Railway freight loading not yet been impacted. Google Mobility Index reasonably impacted, especially where cases are rising. So my feeling is that in the month of April, May, June, there will be reasonable impact of COVID activities on economic activities. It won't be like last June quarter where we were down 24% in GDP terms, but certainly it could be probably -3, -4, -5%. Now, when I say -3, -4, -5, please remember that last year we were down -24%. So on that base, we will still be much better. But compared to what we were expecting, cruising at 10% GDP growth this year, maybe in the first quarter, instead of +10, we will be more like -3, -4 on a steady state basis. But on a year-on-year basis, we will still be higher. Now, again, this is irrelevant. What matters for us is that what is listed companies doing, because that is where we are investing. And we have seen that listed companies somehow or other have been able to manage COVID-19 related lockdowns quite well. In the June quarter last year, NSE 500 companies' total profitability on a quarterly basis came at 32,000 crore. Now that was a sharp drop from expected 100,000 crore plus. It was almost 70% down. Then September quarter, everyone was worried about corporate India. They were expecting COVID-19 impacts to linger. And Nifty 500 companies declared a profit of 1,80,000 crore. It was 6 times more than June quarter. And remember, in September, things had not become as normal. There were still lockdowns. Now, again, people doubted that this is salary cuts, this is no traveling, no business promotion, no advertising, no selling and business promotion, and so on and so forth. December quarter, profits came at 2,10,000 crore. It was 7 times more than June quarter. Now, this is what has supported the market. March numbers have just started coming. We have seen results of TCS, Infosys, Wipro, and few other companies, HDFC Bank. By and large, it looks like that for March 21 quarter, corporate India Nifty 500 companies will post a result of 2,30,000 crore. It's 2 lakh crore more than 30,000 crore announced in June 20 quarter. Now, this has created a very peculiar situation. If I annualize last 4 quarters profitability, which is, and I'm just trying to make it a point. So if I include September, March, and so on and so forth, Nifty is trading at about 42 times trailing earning. But if I annualize just December quarterly profit of 2,10,000 crore into 4, which is 8,40,000, Nifty 500 companies P ratio comes down to about 21 times. Trailing is 44, forward is 21. This is the widest ever divergence we have seen in recent time. And hence, I believe if you are optimistic about vaccination and medical success coming through, then there is limited downside in the market. It's not that we are not going through a tough time. We are indeed going through a tough time, but it will impact 1/4 of June. By September quarter, this effect will go away thanks to vaccination and thanks to medical advances. If that happens, then India is in a much better spot. RBI is totally pro-growth. It's keeping liquidity good. Interest rates are at almost lifetime low. Third, government is now more sensitive to business, and you could see repeated reassurances from PM, from FM, from various chief ministers that we are not going for lockdown. We don't want to impact business. We want to ensure that businesses survive, businesses continue to do well. So there will be government support for it. Now, there are two big things which is happening for India on a longer term basis. And again, this is a call purely on the basis that vaccination will succeed, medical advances will contain COVID. So the first big thing which is happening for India is Production Linked Incentive Scheme, PLI scheme. Government announced PLI scheme to incentivize manufacturing of certain items in India: bulk trucks, auto components, electricals, electronics, telecommunications, textiles, and so on and so forth. Now, if you remember, about 2 decades back, we had launched what was known as Textile Upgradation Fund. The government was giving concessional loans to textile entrepreneurs so that they can set up textile plants. And they hope that by setting up textile plants, India will become big player in textiles. It was a disaster. Few good guys did set up textile plant, and they did create export-oriented units. But bulk of the entrepreneurs gold-plated their plant, siphoned off the money, and created NPA. TUF didn't support Indian textile industry, which can impact India's GDP growth. Now, PLI scheme is totally different. There's no money to be paid for setting up plant. There is money to be paid if you produce and sell. And whosoever produces more will get more incentive, and whosoever produces faster will get more incentive. So effectively now there is a frenzied competition among entrepreneurs to start producing, to start exporting, and claim incentive from the government. In my opinion, PLI scheme is like Maruti to India's automobile industry. When Suzuki came, what was our automobile situation? You could only buy Premier, Padmini, or Ambassador, or Standard. They will decide which color car you have to get, and you have to wait for 7 or 10 years. Automobile sector's contribution to India's GDP or India's manufacturing was in low single digit. Suzuki came and they did lots of things. Where are we today? We are net exporter in automobiles. We make roughly about $14 to $15 billion trade surplus in exporting automobiles, which includes two-wheelers, tractors, motor cars, everything. Number two, automobile sector, which includes two-wheelers, passenger cars, and commercial vehicles, is contributing 40% of India's manufacturing GDP. Just one industry, and all driven mainly by Suzuki. Of course, then Tata Motors and Bajaj Auto and Hero Honda and all those guys joined in. But 40% of manufacturing contribution is coming only from automobile. It has created jobs, it has created growth, and all of us are having world-class car. PLI scheme will do to India's manufacturing what Suzuki's entry did to India's automobile sector. And our belief is that probably by 2025 or 26, 1% of incremental GDP will come from PLI scheme. Now, there's second sector which is also going to support economy like PLI, that is housing and construction. Akhil bhai, no matter how many bedrooms you have in your house today, you are short of one bedroom. So is true for Nikhil also, so is true for me. Work from home has pushed us to have one extra bedroom. So there is demand for house. Now, for some segment of people, affordability has increased because house prices have come down and their salary or their business income has gone up. Number three, because of RERA, the developer cannot take consumer for a ride. They have to deliver. And number four, all three of us today can borrow money on housing loan at a rate cheaper than the state in which we are residing. So government of Maharashtra, when they go out in public to borrow, they pay 6.7, 6.75, 6.8%. And Nilesh Shah and Akhil can go and borrow in market on housing loan at 6.6% or 6.65%. So we are rated better than our own state, our own government in market. Put all these things together, can housing really boom? And more importantly, now there are some states which are giving stamp duty concession. So my feeling is that if we overcome this current crisis of COVID-19 with PLI and with housing, India's GDP growth will move towards higher single digit to double digit. And this will sustain for few years. Now you can imagine what will be the impact on corporate profitability and corporate India's balance sheet because of that. So I don't have visibility in the short term, but I do believe longer term Indian equity and Indian country both will do far better than what we are expecting today. Everything depends upon vaccination and COVID appropriate behavior. Now, what is the downside in this view? The only downside is that, God forbid, these cases don't come under control. 3 lakh becomes 6 lakh cases. Then there will be lockdown. Despite all the assurances, finally country will have to go to the medical crisis. It will impact businesses for sure. But if we withstand that downturn, will things look better once vaccination is done? Answer is undoubtedly yes. So you have a 3-month volatility or a guaranteed downside because of lockdown. But the good point over there is that based on the March 20 experience, now sellers are not going to sell at 7,500 Nifty. And buyers are not going to wait till 7,500 Nifty to buy. So compared to March 20 bottom of 7,500 Nifty, it will be rational to assume that this time the bottom will be made in 5 digits, not in 4 digits. So you do have some downside if current crisis worsen and creates a lockdown. Subject to that, every correction, I believe, is a great opportunity to enter. Post-COVID, listed companies will do well and economy also will do well.
Thank you, Nilesh. I think that's an excellent your thought process and the way you have covered long-term, short-term. Just one point from your data. The phase when you mentioned that the short-term, I'm telling, where you also acknowledge that you don't, no one has visibility. But that's where the maximum clients have their queries that what should I do now for that period of short term where there is no visibility? Should I exit equity or should I enter for more now, giving the long term view is strong? That 3 month is creating a lot of, not, it can be 6 months. It may not be 3 months, it can be 6 months, but that window is what we want your view. What's your view? What should we do as an investor?
So Nikhil bhai, when in doubt, always go back to basics. That is the fundamental rule which one has to follow. When the ball is turning a lot or there is a green top pitch and ball is just whizzing by, there's no option but for the batsman to go and start playing basic, which is just play in the V, survive the first few overs, and then things will stabilize. So my recommendation, Nikhil bhai, is very simple. You create, based on your risk return profile, allocation to equity. At 15,000 Nifty, you should be neutral weight to equity. Why neutral weight? Because from a valuation point of view, at 15,000 Nifty, a lot of the upside is factored in. We are assuming vaccine will be successful. We are assuming there will be no lockdown. We are assuming that GDP growth will be 10% plus this year. Now, if by God's grace, market comes down to, let's say, 12,000 Nifty. I'm not saying that it will go there, but I'm saying that let's assume hypothetically. Now, can you afford to be neutral with equity? Answer is no. That 12,000 will happen obviously when there is crisis, there is lockdown. It will impact corporate earnings for 1 quarter, but it's not going to impact for 10 years or 5 years. That being the case, at 12,000 Nifty, you have to be overweight equity, even though you did lose money from 15 to 12. So my feeling is that right now, if you are over invested in equity, please take your profit out. Let's say you are at 80% equity allocation in portfolio and you are comfortable at 60, please take 20% out, no matter what I mentioned earlier. But if you are at 40% and you want to go to 60%, please start investing today. Yes, markets will be volatile, they'll go up and down, but every correction you should grab as an opportunity to invest so that you can reach 60%. So look at your asset allocation. If you're over-invested, please bring it down to neutral. If you're neutral to under-invested, use every correction to get invested.
Thank you, Nilesh. In fact, this was a very good explanation. But if I talk about the corporate earning, now if we compare the present PE with the last 5-year PE, we see that the market is overvalued by nearly 25%. But there is an expectation, like you mentioned, that till June quarter, there'll be a loss of earning. So which means that the market will become much more overvalued. And because the investor has made a learning from the last first phase that they won't exit when the market, so they will not allow market to fall. So is it only the reason the market is not falling? That's one first question. And suppose market does not fall and there's a loss of earning, then market become more overvalued. Then when is it that the market will adjust to reality? There has to be some fundamental basis for market to be at this level.
So Akhil, this is like 5 blind men trying to figure out elephant. So I'll give you answer from a different perspective.
Great.
So again, I'm just trying to make things more lucid. Don't think that these are my recommendation. You have a scenario where one fintech company is getting a valuation of $1 billion on a mutual fund AUM of about 7,000 crore. And obviously they have a large customer base. Now this is in private market, venture capital market. On the other hand, a listed asset management company with probably 50 times more AUM and also as many large number of customers and also profit making is available at same valuation. Now, if I look at from a private market angle, then this is a market to be overweight because everything is cheap. Their loss-making companies get $1 billion valuation. Here, profitable companies are getting $1 billion valuation and they're still reasonably available. So one way, what angle will you look at it? Private equity angle, venture capital angle, or public market angle? If I wear my glasses from venture capital point of view, entire market is a buy. There's no question of over premium or overvaluation. Now let's look at from a second point of view, which is public market. Now here, what is happening is that the growth of earnings is almost vertical. 32,000 crore, 1,80,000 crore, 2,10,000 crore, 2,30,000 crore. So the vertical speed with which earnings are going up, that is making all past valuation irrelevant. Trailing 40 times, forward 20 times. Now, in this momentum, even if 1 quarter is lost, it doesn't matter because you will cover back in next quarter. Now, even if there is a 5-7 days lockdown in the month of April, can that output be recovered in residual 330, 340 days? Answer is always yes. What we are worried is if it's a 30-day lockdown, that you can't cover in next 330 days. It will be difficult. So this momentum of earnings is giving confidence to markets that no, it is worth holding on. The third is this sentiment. Today, there are many naysayers who say vaccine will never work. India will never be able to control COVID-19. But the broad majority of market believes that vaccination will work. what happened in UK, what happened in Israel will get repeated in India. Now, unless until this sentiment is shaken because of spectacular failure like Chile, there's no reason to believe that markets will correct meaningfully. Finally, let's look at this from a point of view of foreign investors. They have been pumping money into China. They have been pumping money into various emerging markets. Now they have seen that India is one country where growth is almost guaranteed because of things like PLI scheme or housing construction and real estate. Second, they have been providing vaccines to the rest of the world. And in last 1.5 months, we have lost some of our shine in terms of managing COVID. But if you speak to someone in the month of November, December, Jan, Feb beginning, they were saying that you have done a wonderful work. If you can control COVID in Dharavi, you can control in any part of the world. There's no better example of controlling COVID than Dharavi. Now, will we have sympathy, goodwill from Western investors in our market? Answer is undoubtedly yes. From a valuation point of view, as well as from a strategic point of view, it will make sense for them to invest in India. Put all these things together. As long as we can come out of this crisis, the future looks brighter, and hence this valuation, even if it takes a hit because of 1 quarter of lockdown, I don't think so will be a constraint on controlling the market. Now, let me just put all these things in one simple data. Today, our market cap to GDP ratio is 100%. And our long-term average market cap to GDP ratio is 75%. So when you look at 100 on a standalone basis versus 75, undoubtedly it is expensive. It's almost 33% premium to your long-term average. This is like Tendulkar scoring 3-4 centuries in a row, and we expect that he or panchwa bhi maar dega. Well, that doesn't happen. But let me put another number. So global market cap to GDP ratio has become 122. We are at 100. From 75, 100 looks high, but 122, 100 looks low. So my feeling is that because we are relatively better priced vis-a-vis other countries, if we control COVID, then we should be well supported.
Thank you so much, Nilesh bhai. I think very well explained. Jumping from short term to long term. So, as an equity investor, where equity, or we all know earnings, equity returns will chase earnings or the economy over a long term period. And given this, because of COVID, we have almost damaged GDP earning growth rate for maybe 2 years odd. So from here, a long-term equity investor, should be the expectation? Should the equity investor expect 14, 15, which he has seen in long-term always, chasing economy, or what is the expectation which an equity investor should do on long-term?
So, Nikhil, it's a very, very tough question, and we will have to guesstimate. My feeling is that even though in the short term inflation will be higher because of supply constraint, longer term inflation will come down because of the supply creation. For example, we have seen how China creates a hospital in 7 days to control COVID in Wuhan. Now, we have also created a 20,000 liter oxygen plant in one of the hospitals in UP in a record time. We have also seen that we can ramp up medical oxygen production from 2,000 tons to 6,500 tons quickly. Now, this kind of rapid action, like when COVID-19 hit us last March, we had, I think, 2 laboratories which were doing testing for COVID-19. Today, also there is shortage. People are still not able to get testing, but we are conducting 20 lakh tests a day. When COVID-19 hit, our PPE manufacturing capacity was hardly anything. Today, we are second largest producer of PPE in the world. We were hardly making any masks. Today, we are the largest producer of masks in the world. So if this learnings of COVID-19 we can expand into other areas in terms of creating fast capacity, inflation will remain under control. I will put my money that after a spike because of supply constraint, longer term inflation will come down. Now, assuming inflation is, let's say RBI's comfort level of 4%, generating 14% in equity will be impossible. That's like 10% real return. We were generating 14-15% in real return when inflation was 8-10%. So my feeling is that in the first 2-3 years, you may still end up getting double-digit equity return on the higher side, but subsequently, your equity returns will be more towards lower double-digit returns. They will center roughly around 10, 11, 12 kind of thing, rather than 13, 14, 15 kind of thing.
Thank you, Nilesh. In fact, this 10-12% return, double-digit return, is still better than other asset class. So better be
Absolutely.
well placed into the equity asset class only. But for those equity investor only, there are two school of thought. One is that during the stress time, the mid and small cap crash very steeply. So to protect the loss, one should have a higher allocation into the large cap category. And the other school of thought is that because mid and small cap are fairly valued compared to the large cap, so one should have more exposure into the mid and small cap category. So according to you, what should be the portfolio strategy, equity portfolio strategy for the investor? What should be the asset class mix, market capitalization mix?
So Akhil bhai, I will share my personal experience.
Yeah.
In the early days of beginning of our career,
Okay.
there was no SEBI regulations on giving tips and other things. So in one of the marriages, a relative asked Nilesh bhai, soon love. So I told him that this share looks good, you can buy it. I met him after 3-4 years, and by then the stock had gone up reasonably well. So I was expecting that he will thank me for the tip I had given. There was no reaction. So finally I probed him, okay, you must be holding that share. He said, no, I sold it off at loss. I said, why? He said, no, after you recommended, I bought and the share fell some 10-15%. So I got nervous, so I sold it out. Now, it was probably multi-bagger stock, which he got out because it was down 10 or 15%. This is the experience of investors in small and mid cap. Many investors come in looking at the past return. So today they are bullish small and mid cap because last 1 year small and mid cap funds have delivered 100% plus return. Moment they enter and they see this funds coming down 30-40% or even 15-20%, they will get nervous and redeem it out. My recommendation is that you need to invest in small and mid cap, keeping in mind the volatility. It is worth having a part of portfolio in small and mid cap stocks and funds, but please remember that you have to bear volatility. You can only get 100% return if you are willing to take a 50% negative return in a year. If you can't absorb minus 50%, you are never going to get plus 100%.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai. I think that's the point. Just to add to Akhil's question, so as with this background on small, mid cap, large cap valuations and the way they have swinged in last 1 year, so as an equity portfolio strategy, what do you think should be the allocation to large, mid, small, currently to an average investor?
Nikhil bhai, from a valuation point of view, as Akhil mentioned, small and mid caps looks little bit better compared to large cap, but not by a big margin. It is not like March, April, May 20, where we could hand on heart say that small and mid caps are just too cheap. Go and grab them. They are not going to be available at this valuation for long. So my feeling is that you could be marginally overweight small and mid cap. You could be marginally underweight large cap in client allocation with neutral equity allocation at this point of time. And if market corrects because of COVID-19, try to add into small and mid cap because they probably will fall more than the large cap and they'll become more attractive. The one thing which you should care about while investing in small and mid cap, it's essentially quality of business. Many a times what we see is that small and mid caps give very good growth, but then the governance is not good, and then the stock falls. Whether it's one-person beverages, whether it's a software company starting with which was part of Index in 2017. I mean, all those stocks fail because governance is not there. So try to invest in small and mid-cap companies which are good from a governance point of view.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai. I think now moving from Indian equity to global equity. So, what's your view on diversifying into global equity? Is this the right time, and how much allocation should be there to the global equity given the current scenario?
So we were a bit late starter in investing in global markets, but I think I must admit that it's extremely important for an individual to diversify into offshore assets. It gives you hedge against India portfolio. More importantly, it gives you certain opportunities which are not present in India. And it could be in real estate, it could be in equity, it could be in fixed income. Now, for example, recently timber and such natural products have gone up a lot in prices. You can never buy a timber company or timber in India, but there are products available globally. There are technology companies which are on the product side doing great jobs. Those kind of companies are not present in India. They are available globally. So undoubtedly, a client must diversify his or her investment in global markets, stocks, if you can follow them, or fund of funds, which are available now in plenty in India.
Adding to Nikhil's question only. So, Nilesh bhai, what is your view on the currency? Whether the rupee will get stronger, weaker, to what extent?
So I will put my money on rupee getting weaker by about 2 to 4% every year. And this is primarily driven by inflation differential between India and its trade partners. Our inflation is 4 plus, their inflation is 2 minus. So that's why 2% plus our currency has to depreciate. But in the near term future, it's like, you have to watch the hand of RBI. On one side, they have $580 billion of reserves and $40 billion of forward position. On other side, they have their view about rupee's behavior based on inflation differential. So they do allow market to move little bit here, there, but at the right time, they intervene and bring rupee to the level they are comfortable with. So I will carefully watch RBI's behavior and intention in the near future. But over a longer term basis, I will build 2 to 4% depreciation of rupee every year. Now, it doesn't mean that rupee will depreciate by 2 to 4% every year. Maybe for 2 years, it will not move. And in third year, it will come down by 12%. Effectively, you will get 4% every year. So watch RBI and always keep in mind where the rupee is trading today versus where it should be trading in future.
Perfect, Nilesh bhai. In fact, it was a good coverage over the volatile asset class. But what about those conservative investors who keep nearly 75 to 80% of the money into the debt? For them, the interest rate has come drastically down. Nearly 4.5% kind of a YTM is quite low for them. So how do those people safeguard their money and generate a positive real rate of a return in these times?
So, Akhil bhai, you have raised a very, very important point. Senior citizens and conservative investors are going to find it difficult to generate good return, real return from their fixed income portfolio. So one, they should all fill up the senior citizen schemes which are available where you still get higher single digit return. Number two, they should also look at some of the corporate fixed deposits of AAA rated companies where they still today can get higher single-digit return. Third, they should also consider investment in InvIT and REIT, which are listed. On REIT side, there are three listed REITs from Embassy and Mindspace and others, Brookfields. These are kind of hybrid instruments. They do have some risk, but it is far lower compared to equity. And they still can deliver probably higher single-digit return. Now, in senior citizens, you can only invest a limited amount. In REIT, InvIT also, you can only invest a limited amount. So you still have to deploy bulk of your money to get that, less volatile return. Now here, my recommendation is that you try to create a pendulum for you. Let's say for extremely conservative investor, he or she can keep money in, let's say, short-term bond fund when interest rates are rising, to, let's say, a dynamic bond fund or a credit risk fund if they are comfortable with credit risk, to something like monthly income plan, which was earlier known. Now it's called conservative debt hybrid scheme. So effectively, by keeping your money between short end of the bond market, mid end of the bond market, and part equity, and doing allocation between them, you will be able to generate returns which will be still decent enough, and it will give real return. Now, let me take this MIP part slightly out. In conservative debt hybrid scheme, you can go up to 25% in equity. Then there is equity saving schemes where you can go up to 50% or 40% in equity. And then there is balanced fund where you can go up to 70% in equity. Now, whenever markets are falling, you go from MIP to equity saving schemes to balanced fund. And whenever markets are rising, you move from balanced fund to equity saving schemes to conservative hybrid scheme. That kind of pendulum movement will ensure that by taking little bit of risk, you will still be able to generate decent return. And this whole approach on a total portfolio, maybe 10% in REIT InvIT, 10% in corporate FD, 10% in senior citizen schemes, 30-40% in dynamic bond fund or credit risk fund, and maybe 25 to 30% between balanced to conservative debt hybrid. That whole portfolio put together will be able to deliver return.
Thank you, Nilesh. I think that was a good coverage of entire debt market, all durations, and also you touched upon the allocation. So I think also because of paucity of time, we'll move ahead from debt market. Real estate, you just briefly covered, in terms of long-term view, real estate, obviously consumption is going to increase. So what's your view on real estate prices and gold prices, short-term and mid to long-term?
So on the gold side, I am quite bullish at this level of $1,700, $1,750. One, my feeling is that China will start accumulating gold. At some point of time, out of the $3 trillion FX reserve, which is primarily parked in dollar, yen, euro securities, they would love to keep it in gold. Dollar, yen, euro securities remain in offshore jurisdiction, gold remains in your home. Second, whenever liquidity is high and interest rates are low, gold prices do get supported. And third, my feeling is that, the cryptocurrencies which are today backed by nothing, who knows, someday someone will come out with a cryptocurrency backed by gold. And that itself, when the frenzy catches up with such kind of cryptocurrency backed by gold prices can move up. So put all these things together, gold prices should remain supported in the days to come. And the only risk while investing in gold in India is that Indian gold has 10% import duty component. So what is worth $100 in Dubai gets valued at $110 because of 10% import duty. Now, over next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if import duty becomes zero, you end up losing 10% of current value in one go. So subject to this import duty risk, gold should be invested into. For longer term gold investment, there's nothing better than sovereign gold bonds. For short to medium term gold, there's nothing better than gold ETF. And one thing, Nikhil bhai, I would like to warn everyone that, most of us end up buying small denomination gold coins on various occasions. Birthday, niece ka, nephew ka, daughter ka, किसी को marriage में gift देना है. We keep on buying that small gold coin. That's like 30% loss straight. Lower the denomination, higher the discount. If you want to lose 30% of your money, buy a gold coin from a bank and give it to the jeweler, and straight will lose 30%. So please be wary of buying gold in smaller denomination. It's far better to gift gold ETF than gold coin. It won't look nice, but trust me, it is far more valuable. On the real estate side, it will be all local, regional, location specific. But overall, real estate should be supportive. One big trend which I should see in real estate across the country is that city centers which are getting crowded, where businesses and residences were situated earlier, their value will keep on deteriorating, and cities will start expanding on the outskirts where there will be better infrastructure, better roads, more open spaces, and so on and so forth. So if you are in that part of the city where infrastructure is improving, even though right now connectivity might be an issue, over a period of time, that part of city will deliver far more return than the current city center right now. It's better to invest in that part where city is expanding rather than where city is depleting. In Mumbai, if you had invested into Kalba Devi Road or Churchgate area or Flora Fountain Fort area, those have not yielded as much return as, let's say, investment in Bandra, Juhu, or Bandra Kurla complex kind of places. The city shifted from proper Bombay to suburban Bombay, and that's how the real estate appreciation also left proper Bombay towards suburban Bombay.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai. In fact, we have covered all important asset class. Now, one last question which we wanted to hear from you. From you, it's very important because you are a good believer of asset allocation approach. So if a person has 100 rupees and he's a moderate in nature, his profile is moderate, how should he spread his money between debt, equity, international stocks, gold, and other global stocks? What should be that right mix?
So assuming that he is a moderate investor looking for long-term and with no immediate cash requirement, broad allocation between risk and non-risk will be 40-60, 40% low risk, 60% high risk. Within 60%, probably 10-15% will go towards offshore assets, and 35% odd will go towards local, 45% odd will go towards local equity. Within 45, I will go large cap, mid cap, and small cap. And when I say large cap, it means large and mid cap funds, or mid and small cap funds combined. I wouldn't go for sectoral fund for conservative and moderate investor. That will be left for aggressive investor. On the 40% low risk, I'll put 10% in gold ETFs or sovereign gold bonds. And of the 30% remaining, probably 10% will go into REIT InvIT directly, which are listed on stock exchanges or on which future IPOs are likely to come. And balance 20% can be invested into dynamic bond funds or credit risk funds if he's comfortable with credit risk. So this will be broadly the allocation which will deliver him real return above inflation over a period of time.
Excellent, Nilesh bhai. I think that allocation macro to micro, I think, is very well put and covers almost not only moderate, but even maybe 10% swing type of profiles. Just to continue that question, Nilesh bhai, what is your current asset allocation macro micro? A little bit flavor.
So I have been more of an equity investor, and I have severe restrictions because of my job. So a lot of my investments in direct stocks are purely my ESOPs. I worked in Axis Bank and Kotak Bank and ICICI Bank. So those ESOPs form bulk of my wealth. Rest I have invested in real estate, in offshore assets, and in fixed income as well. Tax-free bonds, I was lucky enough to pick it up when they were available at 8-9%. So this is, I also have exposure to gold. So what I mentioned in terms of moderate risk allocation, except REIT InvIT, I have exposure to all the asset classes which I have recommended. My proportion will vary, but I have exposure to all of them.
Thanks, Nilesh Bhai. It's really good to know about your asset allocation. One question is from the client. He's asking about the sector asset allocation. Nowadays, the flavor is more towards IT and pharma. So, which is a good sector prospect, which will do good in the coming time?
So, in the near term, obviously, with COVID-19 rising, defensives will do well. IT, pharma, FMCG. But over a longer period of time, we believe non-defensives will do better as growth picks up. One particular sector where I'm bullish now is home improvement. In last 1.5 years, rarely any one of us has allowed a carpenter or a plumber or a painter or electrician to come into our house. And we are all getting bored by looking at the same parda, same furniture, some tiles which has come out, some paints which has come out. So when vaccination allows us to open our house for strangers, a lot of people will go out to spend on home improvement. An entire chain of companies which are linked to home improvement business, whether it's cement, tiles, pipes, furniture fittings, electricals, consumer durables, that entire segment, plywood, that entire segment will do well. So all those home improvement related companies, I think, will be one of the better outperformer from here onwards. Now, this is more of a strong conviction call. I have little less conviction call on industrials. Why less conviction? Because genuinely conviction is less. But you make maximum money when you are able to pick up when everyone else is in doubt, when everyone else is clear. So why will I recommend something like industrials? Now, if you see right now, private investments are at a rock bottom level. Hardly anyone is investing. Investment is done all by public sector companies or Ambani and Adani kind of large groups. Now, if growth has to sustain, investment has to pick up. Interest rates are low, liquidity is high, private equity capital is available, there will be demand. So my feeling is that some point of time, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, investments will pick up. Now, today, all those industrial companies which are linked to private investment cycle, they are like, they have come through a torrid time. Matlab, Dukal mein ji ke wo log bahar nikle hai. So all of them have become fighting fit. They have cut costs, they have improved productivity, they have trained their workforce, they have improved their working capital. So we have very fighting fit balance sheets and industrials waiting for that pickup to come. And if in 18-24 months that pickup is coming, market will start discounting that in next 6 to 12 months. It's never that they pick up and market discount. Market will always be forward looking. Now, this is the best time to accumulate your industrials. We are little early. We don't have high conviction. But if I try to wait for high conviction, by then prices would have multiplied a lot. So little early, but if you build industrial portfolio, my feeling is that over a period of time, after initial underperformance, it will deliver good return.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai. I think that is also well covered on sector. Now we have 1 hour is up. We are already time up. One last question, the most difficult question. You have to unfold the secret to how come Kotak funds are doing so extraordinary well. Especially the small cap has given 100% return in last 1 year. Not only small cap, I think across the sector, Kotak equity funds have given fantastic returns, and specifically after you taking up, the position at Kotak, Kotak has completely turned around. So what's the secret? We'll close with that question.
So one good thing was that Kotak's performance has improved far before I had joined in, but people didn't notice. And once I joined in, people started noticing it. So I'm getting credit for work which was already done before. But on a serious note, if I talk about fixed income first and then I'll come to equity, we follow SLR. S is safety first. Whatever money I lend should come back to me. So that's how we avoided many groups in which people lost money, because we were always negative about them. Liquidity second. I run open-ended scheme. I'll give you 0.5% lower, but will ensure that your money comes to you every time when you want. We don't want Templeton kind of situation. And then return. So when you prioritize your things, safety, liquidity, and return, by and large, over a cycle, your funds will do well. On the equity side, we have again 3 words, BMB, business, management, and valuation. So in my mind, I have 2x2 box when I want to invest in a company. Is the business good or bad? And is the promoter good or bad? Now, what do I mean by good business? Any business which earns more than its cost of capital over a cycle is a good business. Now, if you're going to earn 8% and you have to pay 10%, you will never be successful. Someday you will fall. But if you're earning 10% and paying 8%, someday you will rise. So we want to invest in good business run by good managers. Now, how do you define good managers? Well, it's just like when I have to, if I have to search a groom for my daughter, I'll be taking a call on the person. Same way I'm taking a call on the promoter. And 9 out of 10, you will go right. You try to understand pedigree of the person. You try to understand his past behavior. You try to see his vision. You try to gauge a person. You will never be 100% right. There will be sometimes you will go wrong. But by and large, by putting those filters, if you are with good management, running good businesses, you will make money. Then you are long-term investor. Now, as long as you avoid bad manager and bad business, you will not lose money. Now, the crucial question is when you are in good business with bad manager or you are in bad business with good manager. Now, we try to avoid them as much as possible. But if you have to take a bet in that quadrant, you are always taking a bet from a trading point of view, not from an investment point of view. So if 90% of my portfolio is in good businesses run by good managers and 10% between other 2 quadrants, and I completely avoid bad business run by bad managers, my equity portfolios will do well. The other thing is valuation. As an investor, you always want to buy things cheap, but then market is never lucky. Market is not like your parent that they will give everything free. So you want to pay a reasonable price and build margin of safety. How do I build my margin of safety? The company in which I am investing, as long as my forecast is that this will grow faster than what market is estimating because of XYZ reason, I have my margin of safety. So we want to invest in those businesses where, in our opinion, because of our research, we have confidence that they will outperform market expectation. That's my margin of safety. Put this 6 words, SLR for debt and BMB for equity, you will be able to generate performance like Kotak Mutual Fund.
Thank you so much, Nilesh bhai. Thank you so much for this time for session. I think it's very, very difficult. Personally, I tell you, it's very difficult to find a person like you who's so technically solid and extremely humble. The live example right now, you gave the credit to Kotak Mutual Fund. Before joining you, funds were doing good.
Nikhil, I'm telling the truth because you know data. You will figure out very quickly.
It's being humble. It's being humble also. So it's very, very difficult to find a person like you, which is so technically solid and humble. Thank you so much, Nilesh bhai, for your time, for the insights, for the valuable insights. I'm sure everyone, there are a lot of questions still coming up, but we'll probably address in the next webinar with you soon.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Nilesh bhai, for your time. Thank you, Akhil.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Thank you, all the clients, for taking out time on this afternoon. And whatever questions have not been addressed, we will try and address one-to-one with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai.